Maverick News. The world is watching. In a universe full of ideas, we draw lightness from the dark to a place where opposites attract. Right meets left, positive touches negative, sparking an explosion of truth. Because politics makes strange bedfellows.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Strange Bedfellows, episode 25. I'm Lori Spencer, along with my friend Rick Walker there in Canada. How's it going, Rick?
Just fine. Great to be back with you.
Thank you so much for joining us. We're happy to have Michal Krupa back on the show tonight. We've been trying to get him back. Last time he was on was, I think, episode 6 back in August of last year, our friend in Poland. You might remember Michal if you missed that show. He is a delight. He is a Polish historian and commentator, currently completing his PhD on American paleoconservatism. And I believe as of next week, we will be allowed to refer to him as Dr. Mike, but not yet. Next week. He's also the host of the VotumTV podcast. He writes a lot and talks a lot about the history of Poland, which is fascinating. His work has appeared in a lot of outlets, including the American Conservative and Consortium News. On his VotumTV channel, he's interviewed some of the best. He's talked to Judge Andrew Napolitano, Ray McGovern, our friend Scott Ritter, Maxime Bernier of the People's Party of Canada, Colonel Douglas MacGregor, Larry Johnson, and my friend Ron Paul, among many others. And tonight, we're going to be talking about his new book, which is coming out next month, February 20th, I believe. The name of the book is The End of Poland. There's a cheery subject. We're also going to talk to him about what's happening now in the Russia-Ukraine war. We're going to talk about Elon Musk's visit to Auschwitz this week, the trucker convoy heading to Texas, pledging to take our border back. Yeehaw. Honk, honk. And we're going to cover some Canada stuff because Mike lived in Canada for many years. We're going to talk about the Edmonton City Hall incident this week and Tucker Carlson's Canada tour and a whole lot more. So without further ado, let's bring in Mike Krupa. Mike, it's great to see you again. Good evening or good afternoon or whatever the hell time it is in Poland. How you doing?
Howdy. Good to see you again. It's good afternoon here so far. Good to be back on the program. Good to see the two of you.
Good to
Wonderful.
see you too, Mike.
Where do we start, brother? There's so much to talk about. It's been a while since we last connected. I'd like to start with your PhD. How soon can we call you Dr. Mike?
Well, the Dr. Mike program, which will be filling in for Dr. Phil. No, I'm kidding. No, I'm not writing in psychology. My PhD thesis is strictly in political science. And I will be defending my thesis on February 5th at the Cardinal Stefan Wyszyński University in Warsaw. And by the way, it's a public defense of my thesis. So if anybody from the world wants to come, you can come. There's going to be treats after on me. So if you want to find out where you can come and even ask me questions, just DM me or email me, and I'll be happy to help out. So after February 5th, you can legally call me doctor. Right now, I'm sort of like Doctor in Spe. So doctor soon to be. I'm
so proud of you going for that PhD, brother. You know, you're never too late to get your advanced degree in life. I admire that.
Well, it's there was this meme flying around because I have to admit it did take me some time to finally bring this to a close. But the meme said, "Never ask a PhD candidate, when will you finish your PhD?" That's one of those things you never ask. You can ask somebody who's studying for a master's degree, but PhDs are one of those esoteric things that it'll come, and when it'll come, you'll know when it'll come. Just don't ask me when. So,
how many years has it taken?
Well, since I started writing, believe it or not, it's going to be 11 years. 11 years. Now, I have to admit, I had periods where I just couldn't write because there's so much going on in my life, moving back to Poland, getting married, buying a house, and so on, setting up a family. But thanks to my wife, and my PhD thesis on the first page is dedicated to my wife, Kate. So, honey, if you're listening, thank you once again for the help, because her editorial work and her motivation were the crucial factors that allowed me to finish this. Because at some point, I was asking myself the question, who the hell wants to read about paleoconservatism in Poland anyway, right? Why am I doing this? But then that other angel came on my shoulder and said, do it, like Arnold, Schwarzenegger.
See, that's where I was confused, because I assumed this book would be your new book. You would think that would be something Americans would also like to read, or American conservatives would like to read, but it's not in our language yet. Are there plans to put the new book into the English language?
I am considering translating the PhD itself, because the book that you mentioned is a different project, but the PhD itself, I do plan on publishing it in Poland in the form of a book. And I think with collaboration of some of the paleocons, or what's left of them, because they're an older generation in the United States, including obviously Pat Buchanan and the man who actually invented the term paleoconservative. He's currently the editor-in-chief of Chronicles magazine, one Professor Paul Gottfried. So if Paul deems it sufficient and good enough to be sort of set on the stage of American research on American paleoconservatism, I'll definitely consider translating it into English and publishing it in some American or at least English language outlet.
So let's talk about the new book titled The End of Poland. Is it the end of Poland? Spoiler alert. Don't ruin the end or anything.
Maybe frame that question a little bit further. And does the title of the book, the subject matter, relate to your new government? Because I think we really need to acknowledge that since we last spoke, you have a brand new government that's sort of at odds with each other, because you have a president and a prime minister that really don't see eye to eye on things, plus political prisoners. You have things going on with your state media. That has to play into everything you just wrote about.
Yeah, well, we were sort of prophetic when we came up with the idea of writing the book, because I'm one of the three co-authors of the book. The other two co-authors are Wojciech Sumliński. He is one of Poland's most legendary investigative journalists. You could sort of compare him to, I don't know, Seymour Hersh in the United States. I mean, this is a man who's seen a lot, who's uncovered a lot, and he's just one of those old school, with coffee stains on his papers type of guy. Although he doesn't smoke. I always tell him you should start smoking as a proper investigative journalist, but he's too good of a man. So Wojciech Sumliński is one of the co-authors. The other co-author is one Major Tomasz Budzyński. Major Tomasz Budzyński was an officer in the Polish equivalent of the FBI. So in Poland, it's called the ABW, the Internal Security Agency. And he was actually the head of one of its largest field offices in Lublin, responsible, among other things, for counterterrorism activity and also operations on the Polish-Ukrainian border. So he went into retirement, and he still wanted to do, his service as a patriot. He set up a company that publishes these books, and we came up with the idea of writing a book, which basically, because what's the book about? Maybe I'll delve into that without any sort of spoilers. We understood that whatever government comes after the last government in October will probably continue on the same lines, the general trajectory of foreign policy. And we were completely right, because Donald Tusk was in Kiev this week. He was bowing again to Zelensky, saying we have to help Zelensky, bring the money and the weapons and so on. So there's no difference in terms of foreign policy, at least as it relates to Ukraine. So we knew that from the start. And what we wanted to do with this book is, because Poland is a product of geopolitics, and we are in a very volatile geopolitical environment, or neighborhood, so to say, this book highlights, through discussions and expertise of people from the West, people from the East who we interviewed, and our own insight, the true position of Poland in the current geopolitical turbulence. There's a lot of so-called experts in Poland whose, expertise basically comes down to repeating all the talking points of CNN or Anna Applebaum. That's what apparently makes them an expert. But they sound cool. They go on all the Polish mainstream television stations. They repeat the crap. Russians are using chips from laundry machines, stuff like that. And it turns out after a couple of months that nothing of what these guys predicted happened. But they're still given, the public forum to speak and spout their BS. So we said to ourselves, we know a lot of experts. I mean, we're very knowledgeable on the issue, especially Major Budzinski. Why don't we write a book that'll be a counter to the BS that's been spouted ever since February 24, 2022?
And that's the new government. They actually make reference to or call, some of their prominent government members a cabinet of experts or a panel of experts or something like that.
Yeah.
So is that why you're referencing this as sort of a counterbalance to that?
In a way, yes, and in a counterbalance to the former regime also, because as I said, the trajectory of foreign policy substantially has not changed and will not change. So, and let's not forget the former prime minister, whose reign ended in October, was actually at one point an economic advisor to the current prime minister. So it's an evolving door, right? Or a revolving door, as they say in the States. These guys all know each other. I'm pretty sure many of them, after the parliamentary deliberations, and they sit down and drink vodka together. There is no main difference. I mean, there is no substantial difference, because I think I mentioned this on the first time I was on the program. They both come from the same, what I call, rotten fruit of, and this might sound shocking to a lot of Western listeners, of the so-called Solidarity Revolution. There are two factions from the Solidarity Revolution. And if you look at the Solidarity Revolution in the 80s, as to a large extent, I'm not saying, 100%. There was a lot of good people in Solidarity, true patriots who thought they were really fighting for an independent Poland. But Solidarity, in many respects, can be called the first successful American color revolution in Eastern Europe. I mean, the aim was to weaken the Soviet Union. The money from the CIA was being funneled. Director Casey was all in on supporting Solidarity. I mean, the printing press was all supported by Langley and so on. So in a way, it can be considered, to a large extent, a color revolution. So in a nutshell, the former prime minister represents the right wing of the Solidarity movement, and the current prime minister represents the left wing of the Solidarity movement. But it's still the Solidarity movement.
Again, I could just stop for just a moment.
Mm-hmm.
The current system, or the result of the Solidarity movement, is a Poland today that in many respects reflects sort of the corporatocracy that we have here in Canada, the United States, and Western countries. And I guess that would be something you would point to as proof that this Solidarity movement was really something that was fueled by and maybe even directed to some degree by the West and the United States. Fair?
Oh, yeah, 100%. I mean, we're seeing it on a smaller scale in Poland, obviously, because we're not that big of a country. But the main trends are there. I mean, if you look at the program of the new government, we have to make up a few years of the woke, trajectory that you have in Canada and the States in the last, let's say, 20 years, especially the last decade. So the new government says, so right now we have to catch up with our patrons in the West. So we have to liberalize the abortion laws. They're talking already about a bill criminalizing hate speech. So no criticism of, LGBT, trans, and so on. That's going to be made apparently illegal. They've even gone as far as proposing a bill, and I think this has already passed by the uber woke Minister of Education, that within 2 or 3 years, I think they're going to start at the elementary level. Students are no longer going to be assigned homework. So let's make the youth even dumber. The reason for this that they're giving is because, students don't have time after school to spend with their family, to go outside and so on. Let's be frank. The majority of kids, they spend their time on this after school, not with family, not with friends, which just makes them more dumber. They're TikToking all along. And if we need something in Poland, it's actually obviously a fair distribution. I mean, you don't want to kill the kids with tons of homework, but I mean, I can't imagine anybody in my time, or I'm guessing in your time, saying, hey, let's make homework illegal because it puts too much stress on the kids. What? They want to make it a stress-free environment. So we know where that's heading, right? This is wokedom, preparing the kids to basically, they're not telling them how to think. They're teaching them what to think, and that is a major difference.
Right. So you say that they have some catching up to do, but it seems like, you had the Law and Justice Party, which, and I'm not so intimately knowledgeable about Poland and the politics there to really fully understand what that party is. But it strikes me that party was more of a populist, conservative type of party. And yet, we see the rise of populism over here. You're just kind of pushing that to the side now, or the voters have decided, and you're bringing in a more progressive government under, Donald Tusk, but still have your president, who is aligned more with the populists. So to me, catching up, it seems like they're sort of maybe way ahead of the curve, and now going into the next cycle. It's very strange to see Poland sort of out of sync and maybe coming back into sync with everything else going on over here. Because I think we're about to see more populism and less progressivism over here.
Well, here's the thing. First of all, if you look at the policies pursued by Law and Justice because they were in power for 2 terms from 2015 to October 2023, a lot of what they did, and they were obviously portrayed in the West as conservative, ultra-nationalist, and so on. That's BS. They were populist and conservative and nationalist in name only. Insofar as you consider Lindsey Graham a conservative or a populist, that's how Law and Justice was populist, literally. So from the outside, you can meme Lindsey Graham and take some words that he says out of context and you say, oh, he's a Reagan, Republican, he's really hardcore, he's extreme right or something. That's the exact same perception when it comes to Law and Justice. I mean, I could go into details right now, but the fact that, I'm just going to give you one example. The fact that Law and Justice was in favor of the so-called European Union Green Deal, which aims to decarbonize all of European economies up until 2050, which basically means you're killing off all the mines in Poland, especially in Silesia, which is suicide for our economy. That was Law and Justice, the supposedly anti-globalist, nationalist, conservative, anti-Semitic, blah, 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 blah party. Mm-hmm. It's complete BS. They sold a lot of older, because the general voter of Law and Justice is usually a person over 60 who survived the communist years, probably attends church once a week, watches the state media, considers it very reliable, and usually doesn't have access to social media or dissident voices. So whatever the television tells them, and unfortunately, a lot of times the pastor at the local church who gets money for the government to, renovate the church roof, for example, they'll tell you vote for Law and Justice because Jesus Christ wants you to vote for Law and Justice. And that's what unfortunately happens. But last time, the Liberals managed to mobilize much better than Law and Justice. And despite the fact that Law and Justice actually won the elections, they got more votes, but that didn't give them a majority in Parliament this time. So that was the difference. And there were some futile attempts to create a minority government, but that went nowhere.
And that's because of the way that the seats or whatever break down.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. You have to have a majority. I think, don't quote me on this, I think it's 231 to have a majority in the Polish parliament. So they didn't get the 230, and they were just under. There were attempts of buying off some new MPs, but they told them to go screw themselves, basically, because nobody wanted to touch Law and Justice after 2 years. And in a way, it was a sort of, in Poland we call it being tired with the material. So it was męczenie materiału, where basically, after almost a decade of them ruling, people just wanted to see new faces. So some people wanted to see new faces. Some people wanted to replace them because they weren't conservative enough. Some people wanted to replace them because they were too conservative, apparently. And that's where you have this new governing coalition, which, I remind people, is actually made up of 3 parties. It's not just one party. They had to actually unite 3 parties to beat Law and Justice. It's the civic platform of current Prime Minister Donald Tusk, and former Prime Minister at the same time, because he was twice Prime Minister already. The Peasants' Party, so basically that's the Farmers' Party in Poland, or the Establishment Farmers' Party, PSL. And then you have the left, basically called the left, Lewica in Poland. These are the uber wokesters. So even in terms of some of their ideas, even Donald Tusk, who's fairly liberal on most issues, is even trying to, tame them down because they really want to go full uber woke in the next year. Gay marriage, abortion up until the time of birth, no homework, total subservience to the European Union, stuff like that. So even Tusk is saying, hey guys, no, slow down. We're not going to go that fast. So in a way, he's stopping the French Revolution, so to say, in Poland. But what's interesting, I read a headline yesterday that starting September, and this just goes to show you the paradoxes of the situation. Starting September, Ukrainian citizens who are on the territory of Poland, especially the ones who escaped Ukraine, being real refugees or not after February 24, 2022, are no longer going to be eligible for social services, the child allowance, which basically is 800 zlotys a month. And that's being liquidated by the liberal government. It wasn't liquidated by the so-called nationalist government, which actually gave the child care benefit to all Ukrainians who came in. It's being liquidated by the liberal government. So that's a good thing in a way. I mean, they should have done that earlier. But obviously the real reason why they're doing it, and this has been made clear by some of them in parliament, is the Ukrainians are making it very clear they don't have the manpower right now in the East. So they're appealing to all the other European governments, especially the ones that are holding a large amount of Ukrainian men, to start sending these guys back to Ukraine. And this was made clear that they're going to be recruiting them from abroad also. So a lot of people were asking, well, how are you going to do that? What, you're going to send, the Azov battalion to catch these guys on the streets of Poland? Well, no, you take the incentives away. So if you take the child benefit away, if you take any sort of refugee benefits away, well, they're going to have to think twice about where they're going to go. And if the same situation is happening in, Poland and Germany, then they're going to have to think twice about whether they should come back to Ukraine. And once they cross that border in Western Ukraine, it's going to be very easy to find them because, you're crossing the border. You're not jumping over the barbed wire fence like, God rest his soul, Gonzalo Lira tried to Hungary in June. That was a sad story. So that's, I think, despite the fact that it's a good thing, but the reasons are fairly nefarious because they just want to send them back to the meat grinder and basically make sure that these guys are going to die a very agonizing death on the Eastern Front. So.
Needlessly, I might add.
Yeah, unfortunately. So that's our last couple of months in a nutshell. And our book is going to be dealing with the current geopolitical situation in the world as it relates to Poland. And we have a whole pool of experts and friends from East and West who also contribute to the book. It's sort of an interview type book, plus the analysis that we give ourselves to make up, in summary, a book that I think will be, I hope, read by even people who are up there in the government, to at least see a different point of view on what's happening.
So why do you think that it's the end of Poland? Is it because you don't see a viable political path back to prosperity, or is it because the parties that are being offered are all sort of offering the same basic you can get Coke or you can get Pepsi.
Yeah.
Which is cola, only cola, no 7-Up.
Well, Scott Ritter would say Diet Coke also. Let's not forget. Which I actually tried this week after a long hiatus and actually said, this is pretty damn good, actually. But getting back to your question, Rick, I think it's three factors. My personal opinion, because the subtitle of the book is How Much Time Do We Have Left? In my opinion, we have 8 to 10 years to save this country. And the reasons are as follows. Poland is tied very closely to the neoliberal model that's currently dying basically in the West, but it's still there. So we are fundamentally a service economy that doesn't produce anything of any significance anymore. We're a service economy mostly for Western corporations that find cheap labor here. And the Western neoliberal model is falling. And that is obviously killing off the potential, the geopolitical potential, the economic potential of all the Western countries. I mean, we're all seeing it in the West. Yeah. So that if we don't change course on that, and the government in power right now just wants to double down, that's not going to help. So that's one issue, the economic issue that'll sort of, make Poland go away because it'll weaken us. The second issue is cultural. In all the major Polish cities right now, within the last year, I think the statistics are from last year, 2022. There are basically no kids being born. The young couples right now that are not even married, it's usually a model of he works at a corporation, she works at a corporation. They took out a huge loan to buy an apartment, say in the center of Warsaw. They have to have 2 Mercedes or 2 BMWs to drive to work, 10 meters from home, but they have to have it. And they have a cat, they have a dog, and they can have kids, but they don't want to have kids. It's a conscious choice. And whereas the problem of people not having kids because they naturally can't have kids is obviously is there and always was there. Right now, we're seeing a phenomenon. It's obviously a phenomenon, again, seeing all across the Western world where the women are saying, especially the women, I don't want to have kids. I want to be a woman. I want to be free. I want to realize my dreams. I want to work. So the number of children being born in the major Polish cities has fallen rapidly. Mm-hmm. It's not so bad in the provinces because people who live in the rural areas of Poland, especially in southeastern Poland, what we call Polish Texas in a way, people still there, you can say there's a conservative culture of, God-fearing, hardworking, family of at least 2, if not 3 kids, and then the dog and the cat, and not the other way around. So that's the cultural issue. And then we have the third issue, which I think is very important and tied to the second one. It's demographics and the ethnic composition of Poland. We have 3 million Ukrainians in Poland. I think a little bit more, but that number does not seem to be winding down in the next couple of years. If we're going to see anything, I think we're going to see more Ukrainians coming into Poland. Now, the interesting thing is, the arguments that the liberals make for open borders in Poland is sort of like the same ones that they're making in the West. We're having a demographic crisis. We have to bring in, these Ukrainians. They're going to make up for the demographic crisis. Well. It turns out Ukrainian women, once they get a taste of, neoliberal corporatist freedom, they don't want to have kids.
They don't like it.
They don't. They want to party. They want to have fun. They want to work. They want to drive the Mercedes with, Boris or Andre or whatever. It's the same cultural trends. And I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation how sort of Poland has to make up the wokeness agenda because we sort of fallen back. So we have to accelerate right now. Well, in Ukraine, we're driving at 50 kilometers an hour in terms of acceleration. They're driving 100 kilometers an hour. I mean, there was a petition in the middle of a war signed by, I think, 25,000 signatories that Ukraine should legalize gay marriage.
Yes.
In the middle of a war. Wow. Priorities, guys.
Priorities.
And apparently, yeah. There's, there's LGBT fighters in Ukraine. There's the LGBT parade, the gay parade.
Their spokesperson for the Ukrainian military is Sarah Ashton Cirillo.
Cirillo, the guy or the girl. I forgot what he is truly.
I don't know.
Whatever. He's mixed up. He's a Marvel superhero in a way, I guess. But he's all over the place.
Your guess is as good as mine.
Exactly. So the Ukrainians coming into Poland, they're not going to make up the demographic. And let's not forget, there was a very, very important report by a professor from the University of Warsaw. He does these annual reports of sort of the status of Ukrainians in Poland. He really does deep dives into their situation, into the Polish perceptions of them. It turns out that about 20% of the Ukrainians currently in Poland, because usually a successful immigration policy is premised on the potential of assimilating most, if not all, of the newcomers. Well, it turns out that 20% of the current Ukrainians in Poland do not want to assimilate into Polish society. And I'm guessing that 20% are the hardcore neo-Banderite element that happened to hop the fence from Western Ukraine to Poland. And these guys, you can see them sometimes on TikTok. One of the first things I saw, this was, I think, February 25th or 26th in the city of Wrocław. I was downtown driving with my wife, Kate. We were coming back from, I think it's shopping or something like that. And we were stuck in traffic in the middle of Wrocław. And a guy pulls up in front of us in a new BMW. It's got the Ukrainian national symbol, the so-called trizub, on his back window. And written in Ukraine, Bandera is our father. In Poland!
In Poland!
You go to Tel Aviv.
That's going to trigger some people in Poland.
Now the thing is, the bastard wrote it in Ukrainian, so a lot of Poles could have looked at it and said, "What the hell? What does that mean?" But I'm not fluent in Ukrainian, but I could figure out pretty quickly by the letters in translator what was written there. It said, "Bandera is our father." I'm like, what the fuck? And Wrocław is one of those cities that, after 1945, as part of the compensation for what we lost in the East, the so-called, this used to be Germany where I'm here right now in the 1930s and before. Poland regained these territories. Wrocław used to be called Breslau during the, as we Poles call it, German occupation. I think Germans might have a different attitude, but that's for us to settle. But generally speaking, the people that settled Wrocław after 1945 were the victims of the Ukrainian nationalist ethnic cleansing campaign in current Western Ukraine. So I'm pretty sure if an older person in Wrocław saw that, he could read those letters, because Poles and Ukrainians, mingled in the 30s in those territories. They knew what that meant. And this bastard came to this city and has Bandera, our father, written on his BMW. And it's like, you want to, this is, I was saying
that's like
to myself,
an invitation to get your ass kicked, isn't it?
Literally, this is like say hello to my little friend time, It's
right.
So that's where we're at.
So this new government, some people are referring to it as a revolution, a political revolution. This new progressive government, it's pro-EU, and they seem to be fairly authoritarian, already in their approach. And you've had a couple of political prisoners, or characterized as political prisoners. Yep. Can you just kind of tell us what happened with regard to that and the way the president reacted?
So I'll try to make this as brief as possible, because I think giving a background on these two guys is important. First of all, I'd like to make it very clear that these two were not political prisoners in the strict sense of the word, and I'll tell you why. The two guys that were arrested were Mariusz Kamiński and Maciej Wąsik. Mariusz Kamiński was the Minister of Internal Affairs during the last regime, and Maciej Wąsik was sort of his aide-de-camp, his right-hand man. But being Minister of Internal Affairs, Mariusz Kamiński was sort of the equivalent of the DNI in the United States, so Director of National Intelligence. So all the special services, with the exception of the military special services and the military intelligence, were all under the purview of Mariusz Kamiński. So that includes the state police, the Internal Security Agency, and the Central Anti-Corruption Bureau. So three fairly powerful institutions that make up the core of the special services in Poland. So what happened was, when Law and Justice was in power for the first time in 2005 to 2007, towards the end of their tenure in government, they formed this coalition. A lot of people called it an exotic coalition, with the then Andrzej Leper, who was the head of what was called the Self-Defense Party. It was basically a party of, I would call them pissed off farmers who did not want to align themselves with the main Peasants' Party, which is in power right now. And the third party was the League of Polish Families, a right-wing nationalist party, pro-life, sort of like Pat Buchanan type vibes. So it was this three-legged coalition, and everything was going swell for some time. Actually, a couple of my friends at that time were serving in government. And all of a sudden, on one morning in July of 2007, there's this huge scandal. Everybody's talking about it, that apparently Andrzej Leper, who was from the Peasants' Party, was caught trying to make a shady real estate deal by buying a piece of land in northern Poland. Long story short, after a few years, it turns out that these papers that made their way to the desk of the then Deputy Prime Minister were falsified. And they were falsified under the purview of Mariusz Kamiński, one of the guys who was just arrested by the new government. So then there was a court ruling in 2015 where it says Mariusz Kamiński and Wąsik, they have to go to jail because they were basically engaged in an illegal campaign to try and entrap the then Deputy Prime Minister, that he was apparently making shady real estate deals. It turns out it was all false. It was all lie. Leper didn't sign anything. Plus, they were doing illegal actions on an operational level as the overlords of the special services. So they're convicted, but they had the right to appeal. So technically, they weren't guilty. But despite that, the president, who is still the current president, Andrzej Duda, he pardoned them. And that created a whole legal shitstorm because legal scholars from the left and the right began this battle whether a president of Poland constitutionally can pardon somebody who's not convicted, because they were convicted, but they could appeal. So technically they weren't guilty yet. Only after the ruling of a higher court he could have pardoned them, but he pardoned them after ruling of a lower court. So that was and I tend to agree with the scholars of the the mainstream liberal scholars that yes, the Constitution does seem to provide for the fact that only if you are found guilty by a higher court, ultimately, only then the president can pardon. But the president disagreed and he pardoned them. A couple of years passed. We have the elections in October. All of a sudden, a new ruling comes from the Supreme Court in Poland, whereby the judges state The pardon of the president was illegal. The president is not responsible for the justice system in Poland. Only judges can rule on that. Therefore, Kamiński and Wąsik are guilty, and because they're guilty, they cannot longer be members of parliament. So the Speaker of Parliament, he stripped them of their rights, and the police basically started moving in to arrest these guys because they were found guilty. So what do? They start obviously organizing the entire Law and Justice Party around them because they were considered, political prisoners. And just to mention, Mariusz Kamiński was also Minister of Internal Affairs, responsible for the most idiotic and draconian COVID measures, which killed a lot of people, which destroyed a lot of people's lives. He was all in on that. He was responsible for the open borders policy after February 2022 and letting in, half of Ukraine to Poland. That was him. He was responsible for those sickening statements that he made on Twitter after the Russian ambassador was doused with red paint in Warsaw 2 years ago. His Twitter statement basically amounted to, it's unfortunately, but you have to understand the emotions of the Ukrainians. I'm pretty sure he wouldn't write that if the American ambassador was doused with red paint in Warsaw. I mean, all hell would break loose. We'd have like martial law if that happened. So it just goes to show that, the chief law enforcement officer in Poland was basically, a clown. Diplomatic protocol was broken. I mean, this is, wow. We have special codes in Poland based on the Vienna Convention and other international statutes where a diplomat, no matter how much you hate the country, is untouchable. You cannot touch a foreign diplomat. It's like sacred ground. And this guy just treated it as if, I don't know, somebody spit on his, his shirt. So he was responsible for a lot of that. And I really don't like the guy. I think he comes from what I call the John Brennan school of intelligence and entrapment. John Brennan, and what's the guy who was testifying and said to Rand Paul that we do not spy on Americans?
Is that Mike Rogers?
No, the
over
other guy.
NSA?
Bald with glasses. Brennan and Clapper, Jim Clapper.
Oh, James Clapper.
Yeah. James Clapper, yeah. So Kamiński basically represents the Jim Clapper and Brennan school of entrapment and intelligence and spying. That's him in a nutshell.
Man, so Polish politics is so crazy.
Yeah, we're sort of like the funnier version of Americans in many ways.
It's so much like the United States and
the ridiculous version of what Americans do.
More ridiculous than us?
Yeah,
that's hard to do.
Yeah. Being Polish, it's always a little bit more funny. But anyways, so what happens is the Speaker of the Sejm strips these two guys of their voting rights. They can no longer be MPs. They no longer have immunity, and the police can arrest them. So they're waiting to be arrested. Now, the president, because he's their friend, and he pardoned them the first time, and I happen to think that the reason why he pardoned them and the reason why he was so eager to pardon them 2 days ago is because Mariusz Kamiński has some information on the president that the president doesn't want to have revealed. But that is my private opinion. I don't know what the true status of those documents are. It's just my suspicion that is the case. So anyways,
interesting.
As the police are making their move on Kamiński and Wąsik, what do? They go to the presidential palace because the president invites them to a swearing in of new advisors. So they're sitting there in the presidential palace thinking, we're safe here. The police aren't going to come here. Well, lo and behold, the police comes into the presidential palace and they drag these guys out. And the Polish equivalent of the Secret Service, they didn't do anything. They didn't try to stop the police. So they take these guys out, they handcuffed them, and they drove them off. Now, the president, he was a little bit late to the party because he, at that time, as they were being arrested, was in another part of Warsaw attending a meeting with that clown Cichanowskaja, who's sort of the Belarusian Juan Guaido, supposedly representing the opposition in Belarus. Yeah. So which is hilarious. You got these two guys being arrested in Poland. He's talking to some opposition leader from apparently authoritarian Belarus. It's a clown show. It's
amazing.
A clown show. So they were dragged out. The president comes back. He's like, hey, where are they? Well, the police took them, Mr. President. So that started a whole week or 2 weeks of protests in front of the jail cells. People were screaming, that they're the Polish version of Assange, or political prisoners, blah, 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 blah. At the end of the day, and the president himself, he sort of looked like, you're driving down an Ontario road at night and you see the deer in your headlights. He's like, what? So the president was kind of surprised. You came into my house and you took these guys while I was away? Like, how does that happen? And here's the kicker. Apparently, he was late to the party because a bus broke down in the middle of Warsaw, and the government motorcade couldn't make their way around it. It's just, I mean, it's
it's Keystone Cops there. I mean,
that's
really.
like Naked Gun, Keystone Cops, and Airplane in one. It's hilarious. Lloyd Bridges. I mean, the best of times. Anyways, these guys sat in jail for 2 weeks, and it's funny because their wives. They made this they had this press conference, the wives of these two guys, and they were appealing for the president to pardon them again because right now they were finally convicted, so he could pardon them, and the reasons they were giving for why their husbands should come back were hilarious because usually we'd say my kids need the husband, I want my husband back. Apparently, I'm not quoting her directly, but one of the wives said, "I need him back because I don't know how to heat the home." I need his help. And it was just so meme potential in there, and the internet was going wild. It's like, just bring him back for an hour, put on the heater, and you could take him straight back to jail. So yesterday, no, I think on Thursday they were finally released.
They had a hunger strike, didn't they? Didn't they go on a hunger strike?
They had a hunger strike, yes.
Yeah.
Apparently, they found God at the same time. They claimed they were praying the rosary all this time, which is funny because one of them is an atheist. I don't know how he did that. Well, the Lord works in mysterious ways. But yeah, so right now they're out. And, we have the saying in Poland, whenever something funny happens, we say, oh, it's like a Czech film, Czeski film. Well, I think the Czechs are looking at us right now saying, it's like a Polish film.
No, it's a Polish film.
So it's comedy on many levels. But I think personally, that these guys should be in jail, and I don't think the president should have pardoned them because they did a lot of wrong. I mean, they were rightfully convicted. Andrzej Lepper, by the way, the guy who was at the foundation of this entire scandal, the guy who was entrapped in 2007. That's an interesting story in and of itself. He apparently committed suicide in 2011, but he committed suicide just like Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide. So you know what I'm trying to say here. Yeah. But that's a whole different story. So basically, the Polish equivalents of, Jim Clapper and Brennan should be in jail. That is my belief as a Polish citizen. And they were definitely not political prisoners. If you want to talk about a political prisoner, Google Mateusz Piskorski, Piskorski, a personal friend of mine who, during the tenure of Mariusz Kamiński as coordinator of special services in Poland, was accused of being a Russian spy and a Chinese spy, by the way, who spent 3 years in jail without a conviction and only went out on bail because the judge says, you can't keep this guy indefinitely. This isn't Guantanamo Bay. So technically his case is still ongoing, but it was a totally trumped up, phony case. A lot of the suspicion is they wanted to show the overlords in Washington that Poland is at the forefront of fighting Russian subversion. So we take this guy who, went to Crimea, has a lot of Russian contacts as a publicist, writes a lot of good geopolitical analysis. Let's make him the scapegoat to show anybody else that if you, diverge from the government line on Russia, we'll come for you too. So that was a real political prisoner. These guys are just prisoners, not political prisoners, or were at least.
Speaking of crazy Polish politicians, this happened about a month ago, but I've been dying to ask you about it. I want to ask you about this fucking guy.
Panie pośle, co pan robi? Panie pośle, co pan robi? Panie pośle, co pan robi? Jak tak można było? Proszę zejść na dół, proszę państwa, zejście na dół, to się musi przewietrzyć. Wstyd powinno być tym, proszę państwa, którzy uczestniczą w aktach satanistycznego kultu. Proszę państwa, proszę zejść na dół. To mój telefon, panie pośle, spokojnie. Proszę zejść na dół, proszę państwa.
Woo! Wow. That was crazy. Okay, who is this guy Braun, and why the hell did he do that? Explain.
Just to make things clear, there's no relation between him and Eva Braun.
That was my second question.
It's clear. No, but it might surprise you, and I think your viewers. I actually know him very well.
You do?
Braun, yes, he's actually a friend of mine. He's the head. He's one of the. He's the head of the so-called Crown Party, which is one of the coalition parties making up the Confederation Party in the current Polish Parliament. Confederation Party is considered to be the only right-wing conservative, sort of libertarian opposition in the Polish Parliament. So I won't go into the details of Confederation, but let me try to sort of explain why he did it, what happened, and sort of the political repercussions of that. First of all, my temperament is different than Grzegorz Braun. So personally, I wouldn't do what he did. I think that was a little bit over the top,
maybe.
Because unfortunately, the problem right now with Grzegorz is he's been stripped of his immunity and he's going to court. So instead of preparing election campaigns, which we have 2 coming up in Poland, we have local elections in April and we have important European parliamentary elections coming up in June, where he could have, I think, had a lot of potential with his party and with Confederation to make some waves. But right now his situation is a little bit complicated.
Basically, so have they charged him with a crime, and what did they charge him with over that incident?
The charges being made with that specific incident is that, according to, I forgot what article of Polish code it was, he interrupted a religious ceremony. Now, here's the thing. The organizers of the lighting of that Hanukkah candle, which is a fairly recent event in Polish parliamentary history, started I think a decade ago. So it's not that, it's not that old. It didn't take place in the 90s and sure as hell didn't take place during the communist years. So it's something new. And the organizers themselves did not state that this was a religious ceremony. It's sort of like a cultural, Jewish sort of Disneyland in a way. It's cultural. It's Christmas, there's Hanukkah, but it was not formally a religious ceremony. And that's what he's being charged with, that this was a religious ceremony.
I see.
Now the funny thing is that Grzegorz Braun obviously has his views. You can discuss them. You can call him an anti-Semite, a Nazi, whatever. But he pointed out to a very important sort of dichotomy in the narrative of the current Polish parliament. See, the current Polish speaker of the parliament and a lot of his allies in the new government, there's a crucifix hanging above the door of the entrance of the plenary sessions of the parliament. It's fairly big. They said, we got to take it down because separation of church and state, that can't be there. That's a religious symbol. We have to take it down. Okay, I don't agree with that, but it's a logical, it's an argument. But these same people have nothing against a Hanukkah candle being lit in the parliament. So
I see.
You're against this, but I don't understand why. You should, if you're against this, you should be against this also, right? And it'll be like, reading of the Quran in the Polish parliament. No religion, then no religion, right? So there's a lot of discrepancies here. So first of all, the organizers didn't consider it a religious ceremony. The prosecutor says he interrupted a religious ceremony. Grzegorz calls it an MP intervention. And the other thing is that, you're all spouting at that crucifix above the door there, but you're all attending. And what happened was after he doused the flames, a day later, they lit the Hanukkah candle again. And everybody from the president, the speaker of the Sejm, I think the prime minister, and basically most of the MPs from the current ruling party, they all converged there. It sort of looked like an apology tour in a way. Now, obviously, the optics, they are what they are.
Well, he sprayed a woman in the face. That poor Jewish lady that he sprayed in the face.
That lady, she is actually from Poland. I think she has a Jewish background, Jewish ethnicity, at least 50% of her. But there is still discussion whether he intentionally doused her or whether she just
I was wondering, did he mean to do that?
That'll probably have some meaning in court. From what he's saying, he says he didn't douse her intentionally, that apparently she was trying to pull him away and it just moved into her face. So I'll leave that to the court. But generally speaking, as I said, I probably wouldn't have done that. I think I was a little bit over the top because it complicates
just a little bit,
issue.
You think?
But on the other hand, the response that came from this, the groveling to what I would call our local Israel lobby, it was just way out of line. I mean, okay, he did what he did, but do you really have to bring the entire apparatus of state to light a Hanukkah candle while at the same time you're criticizing the cross above the entrance to the plenary? It's hypocrisy, basically.
Well, at least now I understand why he did it. He was just kind of calling out hypocrisy, but he probably could have found a better way to go about it.
He was, but there's also, and as I said, this is a topic for a different discussion, because the group of Jewish organizations that organize the lighting of this candle every year comes from a Jewish, I don't know, religious organization or sect called Chabad Lubavitch. And Chabad Lubavitch are the guys who had those funny tunnels discovered a few weeks back in New York. I don't know if you heard about that.
Oh, yeah.
It's the same group. And if you delve back into what the founder of Chabad Lubavitch, one rabbi, I think his name was Mendelssohn, but don't quote me on that. He wrote some pretty. I looked through his works because they're sort of like an offshoot of mainline Judaism, considered orthodox. Some of his writing about non-Jewish people, I think, could be considered by any regional observer to be racist. So I leave it up to the reader. Look it over yourself. His texts are online. Plus the fact that Chabad Lubavitch in New York, after this tunnel issue, which was reported very extensively, and we still don't know what was happening in there. But, I mean, the memes, Teenage Mutant Ninja Jews coming out of the tunnels, that was just hilarious.
There are some great memes about that.
Yes. Nobody really knows what was happening there. And, that soiled mattress coming out of there, I mean, what the heck was that all about, right?
The hell was that?
And then if you go back in history and you look at the history of that particular group, because the Chabad headquarters are actually in Brooklyn, they have a history of taking, liking children, so to say. Sort of Epsteinish Biden type vibes there, with a couple of, I think, of their rabbis or some of their organizational people being convicted of pedophilia. Those are things for, our readers and listeners to look up into, but there's definitely a stink there. So that organization is the same one, basically, their Polish chapter that organized the lighting of that Hanukkah candle. And it's funny because, 3 weeks after that, the whole tunnel thing explodes and everybody's like, hey.
Isn't that weird? Then everybody knew who they were, but before that,
maybe
nobody
Brown was
did.
onto something, so who knows? But as I said, my stance is that...
Can we just back up a little bit? Because I'm hearing these kinds of accusations thrown around about pedophilia and children in tunnels. It sounds very QAnon. So can you point us in the direction of some references that can substantiate any of these kinds of things that go beyond, what I would view as sort of a cliche and an anti-Semitic trope?
Yeah. The tunnel issue itself, I don't know what the tunnels are serving for, because there's still an ongoing investigation. And it was funny to see the NYPD cops who came there. They were surprised themselves. I mean, what's this being used for?
It was some sort of real estate thing. They were trying to build extra
together, and
I hope so.
Illegal apartments underground.
Yeah. Apparently, they weren't able to get building permits or whatever, and they went ahead and started constructing these things anyway. That's one of the explanations.
I heard a version it was apparently built during COVID so they could practice their religious services and so
that
on.
Too,
so the cops wouldn't
right.
get at them.
They could get around the lockdowns that way.
I have no idea what the tunnels are for. However, if you Google the Chabad Lubavitch community in Brooklyn, there were headlines from the New York Post, from the Jerusalem Post, from a few years back. I can't reference you the particular articles right now, but I'm pretty sure Mr. Google will help with this, where people associated with that branch of Chabad Lubavitch in New York had problems, were in court, were suspected of. I think there was at least one conviction in the 90s of a guy who was engaged in pedophilia. So it could be tied into this. It doesn't have to be, but there's a stink there.
But the internet went wild, especially when they saw the stained mattress. Every conspiracy theory in the world, and a lot of them were pretty anti-Semitic, and nobody seems to know what the hell's going on. But everybody's got a theory about it. And speaking of apology tours and anti-Semitism, or being accused of being an anti-Semite, Elon Musk was in your neck of the woods this week, came to Auschwitz, and I'm sure most people have seen the footage, but I'll just play a quick clip of it.
How do you balance the necessity for free speech with all these critiques about, what is hate speech? What is anti-Semitism?
It's difficult to get to perfect truth, and sometimes people have different interpretations of truth, but one can always aspire to be as accurate as possible and to minimize the error between what is being said and reality. Relentless pursuit of the truth is the goal with X.
Interesting. Relentless pursuit of the truth, whatever truth is. A lot of different perspectives on that. Any comments?
Well, Ben Shapiro is not somebody I particularly like, so maybe I won't comment on him. But I think Ben represents the epitome of American neoconservatism with a lot of Zionist elements. But when it comes to Elon, this personal choice. I mean, I am kind of angry that he didn't want to meet with me. I'd love to talk to Elon Musk, but I hope, because there's a lot of discussion going on about what happened and why this happened right now in Poland. I mean, if this doesn't precipitate in free speech being limited on X pertaining to issues such as Gaza, Israel, basically free speech, then we can say, okay, it was a symbolic visit to prove to the world that I'm not an anti-Semite. But there are a lot of questions being raised because, a few weeks back, there was that whole issue where the ADL wanted to shut him down. They wanted to take out ads from Twitter. They were appealing. I mean, Greenblatt was all over the place saying that we have to take down X. I hope this is not in connection with that, and that Elon didn't, they didn't make him an offer he couldn't refuse. And now he's going to be shutting down dissident voices on Twitter because, for example, they're criticizing the Israel lobby in the United States. So whatever Elon does, I don't really care, as long as he doesn't shut down free speech on X on account of this. Whatever. It is what it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, censorship, media control, these are issues that are front and center, especially right now. And we're seeing it in Poland right now because the new government is exerting new control over your television stations, right?
Yeah. Well, the thing is, that was expected because the Polish state TV, which is TVP, they have it's a huge corporation. It's three main television channels. You have regional channels, you have a sports channel, you have a history channel, culture channel, movie channel. It's all under the banner of TVP, Telewizja Polska, or Polish television. So every time a new government comes in, a new government also comes into the state television. That's to be expected. But the reason, the way they did it this time was kind of, they really wanted to get in there. So they had to really force their way sort of into the state television, even though at the end of the day they would have taken over, but they wanted to really do it quickly. And as I said, it's part of this acceleration of wokeness in Poland, because one of the first things that happened when they took over the state television was one of the presenters that came in was a very liberal woman. She's got tattoos all over her. She looks like a big bird took a crap on her, Then you have this huge gathering of LGBT youth that came to the morning program of the main TVP station. They're all sitting there with rainbow flags. Oh my God, finally we're liberated. We could come on television after, 10 years of fascist government and so on. So, the pendulum swings the other way, and all of a sudden you bring your people into the state television. The next elections, pendulum swings another way. You bring another group of people associated with the ruling party. So that's unfortunately the nature of state television, sort of like the CBC in Canada. Although, has the CBC ever been even slightly conservative? I'm not sure. So even if the conservatives are in power, they're still Justin Trudeau, right? But in Poland, at least formally the narrative changes, and you do get a change in basically the entire set of reporters and media directors in state television and state radio, by the way.
It's interesting to see how the politics quickly, the dots get connected between what's going on in Ukraine to what's going on in Gaza. Can you just comment on those lines connecting?
The connection that I'm seeing first and foremost is that Israel is at the head of the line, and the establishment is trying to basically, let's forget about this guy Zelensky. That was yesterday. Today we're concentrating on the Houthis, Yemen, Israel, and so on. So I think the connection is that the American establishment, the neocons, the deep state, the military industrial complex is tired of Ukraine, and they really want to move on to something else. And, who would have thought last year that John Kirby would be saying at press conferences, we have no money left. We have nothing left to give to Ukraine. Meanwhile, we're giving, what was it? That supplemental deal that they didn't go to Congress was, I think, couple of million that Blinken signed off without the approval of Congress that went to Israel just before Christmas, citing urgent national security requirements, which was total BS. I think Israel right now is the main issue that will decide what happens in the elections. I think Ukraine right now is a sideshow. And I think it's become sort of, not cool and not hip anymore to talk about Ukraine. I mean, nobody's going to Kiev anymore. Donald Tusk is, but that's Donald Tusk. I don't know whether he really believes in what he's saying, or he's just basically trying to position himself as the next proxy against Russia. But I think the world's attention right now, especially with the ICG ruling coming on Friday on Gaza, is going to be much concentrated on the Middle East. But that does not mean that Russia is stopping, because they are in a position of active defense right now. And if we are to believe what our common friend Scott Ritter is reporting from his recent visit in Russia and discussions with officials in the Donbass and military officials, in the spring, there most likely will be a huge offensive on the side of the Russians. There will be a total crumbling of the Ukrainian military. And by September, apparently, this is what Scott is saying, they're expecting the war to be over. Now, the open question is whether Zelensky and his regime will survive that, because there are apparently rumors floating around that he's going to be evacuated to Western Ukraine and set up a sort of government, not necessarily in exile, but in a different location in Lviv. And continue to fight the sort of partisan insurgency from Lviv while the Russians take over Kiev. I don't think they're going to go as far as Kiev. I would probably...
I heard they were going to move the whole government, the new government of the new Ukraine, to Lvov. And basically everything west of Lvov would be the new Ukraine. I mean, they're putting out feelers right now as we speak. It's Zelensky saying, I'm just uncle. I've had about enough.
Let's not forget that Western Ukraine is the hotbed of Ukrainian nationalism. So they're going to be feeling right at home in Lvov. Eastern Ukraine, Kiev still has a lot of the Russianness in it. I have a lot of Orthodox people. I mean, Kiev was actually the place where Russia began as a country, Kiev and Rus. That's where it all spread out to the east, right? But Lvov, or Lviv, is the hotbed, the center of Ukrainian nationalism, directed against Poland, against the Jews, and against the Russians. So it's going to be really hilarious if a Jewish Ukrainian president moves to Lvov, to the hotbed of Ukrainian nationalism, and directs a government.
Isn't that just rich?
That is hilarious.
Truly. Well, I'd like to shift the focus a little bit to Canada, because I know you've got roots in Canada. Let's talk about, there's a lot going on. It was a very eventful week. Of course, Tucker Carlson invaded, like he's been promising to do for quite some time. He came to Canada this week, and I think Rick has a little sample clip of one of his speeches. But your brother went or didn't go to the speech in Edmonton this week?
I wanted him to go to the Edmonton speech. He seemed excited about Tucker in Alberta, but I haven't confirmed yet if he actually went. My brother's in northern Alberta, and if you consider the weather up there, I think it's a 3-hour drive from Cold Lake to Edmonton. But he was excited about Tucker. He actually sent me a picture on my Signal. I woke up in the morning to see a picture. He says right-wing extremists, and there was a Danielle Smith, the Premier of Alberta, Lord Conrad Black, Jordan Peterson, and Tucker in the middle of that. So wow, pretty cool looking photo. Great. So he was excited. He was excited that he was there. That's for sure.
Yeah. So here I have this clip of Tucker
let's
Carlson,
take a look.
And he kind of calls out Canada's Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister, serving in 2 roles, Chrystia Freeland, who I'm sure you'll have a lot to talk about.
Bring it on
here.
Give it to me.
now facing a far slyer opponent, which is the feminine expression of fascism, the Chrystia Freeland version of fascism. Yes. Yes.
Bravo.
And I know a lot about this because I knew Chrystia Freeland when she, was a journalist at the Financial Times, whose name shall forever live in infamy for employing her. And I remember even then thinking, this woman is not bright at all. But boy, does she have high self-esteem. I don't think I've ever even seen it's off this. I don't know what the self-esteem measurement scale is, the Richter scale. But her self-esteem was literally unassailable. It was bomb-proof. If a nuclear bomb dropped on your town, you could hide beneath Chrystia Freeland's self-esteem and live. There was like nothing you could do to shake it. Nothing. No amount of evidence of her stupidity and wrong decisions and idiotic views could dissuade her from the core belief that she was awesome and you were not. And I kind of stood back in admiration. So I guess I shouldn't be totally shocked that she's helping to run and destroy your country. But she's doing it in her signature way. She's not getting on the CBC, her media outlet, which like almost all outlets in this wonderful oppressed country is run by the government. It's all state media. It's Albania 1985. And I'm sure we have people whose families were refugees from Albania. Welcome. And you know what I'm talking about. But at least you could say if the Albanian leader in 1985, Enver Hoxha, that when he went full fascist, he just like didn't mince words. Shut up and obey or we'll shoot you. Chrystia Freeland is wise enough, clever enough, in her serpent-like way, to make it all about your protection and safety. All about your protection and safety. No, we're just trying to help you. That's why you're in shackles. You're being arrested right now.
Savage.
Oh, it's for the common good. Don't worry, you'll understand. I always want to say, Mrs. Freeland, can I go to the bathroom? No, you can't. And you can just imagine her taking great glee as your fourth grade self wet his pants in class as Mrs. Freeland refuses to let you go to the bathroom.
Oh, epic.
It's brilliant. Yeah. I love it. And, it caused quite a stir, as you might imagine, with the liberals. Their reaction was absolutely priceless.
Well, here, let me share a little bit of that with you. I've got a very brief clip with Stephen Guilbeault, the Minister of Climate Change and Environment.
Yeah, great minds think alike. I think I brought the same clip. Let's see if we brought the same one.
Here we go.
Oh, yeah.
And Minister Guilbeault, you're the minister that, as your colleague was saying, was targeted. How do you feel about
this goes beyond me and the fact that I was targeted last night at this event. This increases political violence against everyone who runs for office in this country, whether they're doing it at the municipal level, at the provincial level, or at the federal level. As my friend and colleague Randy said, we can have differences of opinion. We can bang our fist on the table when we meet. We can have strong disagreement, but to incite violence against people who disagree with you, that's not how things should be done in Canada.
Can you clarify what is the
No, we'll just arrest you.
What is the violence? I think the minister also said this in French. What is the violence that they are bringing to Canada? What is the political violence that you're talking about? Just to be very clear.
Well, to put a target on someone's back, for example, to
put
someone in crosshairs.
And Minister.
Yeah, and then she went on and said, "So what should we do? Should we have had Tucker Carlson arrested? Blah 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 blah." If I remember right after that, the journalist. It's funny them talking about political violence, and what do? They arrest journalists like David Menzies from Rebel News. They freeze people's bank accounts when they protest. Go ahead, Mike.
And they beat the crap out of the truckers in Ottawa too.
Yeah. It's a travesty when you consider that even the highest court in Canada came down with the ruling that the Emergency Act was unconstitutional. Let's start
Just
with that.
this week.
The guy with the beard was looking like an alcoholic version of Robert Downey Jr. standing beside him. And that guy, who's apparently the Minister of Climate, whatever, looks like the typical guy who would go and rat to the teacher on you when they find you in high school smoking with your friends outside the garbage dumpster. Typical typical guy like that, so no respect, forget about it. But I mean, it's a clown show. But I was actually pretty surprised to find out that the journalists were asking intelligent questions. I mean, how is he, what is the violence that Trucker Carlson represents to you? Oh, he's putting a target on my back. I mean, what the hell is that? It's a clown show. But yeah, it's one of those miracles, I think, that happens in Canada. I know that they're appealing it, but that Emergency Act ruling that came down from the High Court, that's pretty surprising. And I think
little good news for a change.
Yeah, a little good news in Canada for sure, because it openly says basically you were oppressing your political opponents, literally oppressing them. So
yeah, an absolute violation of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And I said that from the beginning. I said Canada died the day that he invoked the EA because the government literally went to war with its own people.
I think one of the most important issues, if I may just say something on this point again, is what Maxime Bernier has been, because you're having an election coming up in Canada, right, soon.
Yes.
And Maxime, he they call him Mad Max. He's been at the forefront of fighting all this. I mean, he was arrested himself. I think it's very important to all our Canadian listeners, and I know there's a lot of you out there, good Canadian patriots. I talk to you sometimes. I understand you want to get rid of Trudeau. Very important. We've all tired of him, but make sure that you don't fall for the fake conservatives who are doing the exact same thing and towing the line during COVID, during Ukraine. Make sure to be very careful who you vote for, because Pierre Poilievre right now is trying to make himself out to be this anti-vax, anti-COVID hero who stood up for the rights and freedoms of Canadians. Total BS, and it can be easily documented. That's why I highly recommend to follow Maxime Bernier on Twitter. This isn't an election ad, by the way. But Maxime is pointing this out, and I think he deserves to be pointing this out because he was out there doing the Lord's work, doing the right thing.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. The PPC has its own challenges, but I'm just wondering, how much did they pay you for that?
I'm sorry, I only get paid in Russian rubles.
Yeah. Well, Maxime Bernier has been on this program before, and I totally understand where you're coming from, and it doesn't take much to connect another dot from Ukraine to Israel to Washington to Canada. All of this stuff is intertwined.
I mean, at some point during the Ukrainian crisis, you could be seeing that Canada was even more fanatical in its support of Kiev than the United States. I mean, it's not surprising with Christopher Freeland in the government, but they were, outdoing themselves literally. I mean, they wanted
including
to give
Pierre Poilievre.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Some opposition, they all agree with each other 100%, at least on that.
If you consider the power of the Ukrainian lobby in Canada, it's much more powerful than the Ukrainian lobby in the United States. So that explains a lot. Follow the money and the influence.
That's right.
And let's not forget the famous Nazi in the Canadian Parliament, for God's sakes.
Yeah, that happened too since we last saw each other.
Highlights of the last year, exactly. Yeah.
Well, another thing that happened this week, which I just find as an American shocking, and I wanted to ask your thoughts on it, because you come from, the darker chapters of history in Poland, is what happened to Dr. Jordan Peterson this week, and sort of the re-education camp that he's going to be, re-education center that he's going to be forced into if he wants to keep his medical license. Take a look at this.
Controversy in Canada. An Ontario court ruling that Jordan Peterson can be forced to attend social media training demanded by the Ontario College of Psychologists over his past post criticizing gender ideology and climate change.
So if he refuses to comply, he loses his license to practice clinical psychology. But Jordan Peterson says his fight is not over.
And joining us right now from Ontario, Jordan Peterson. Jordan, they say you want to keep your license, you got to do it, but you say you're not going to do it. How's this going to end?
No, I didn't say I wouldn't do it. I did say that I don't believe that it'll help.
Okay.
I'm in their hands at the moment, fundamentally, because they've already sentenced me, so to speak, to an indefinite period of social media retraining with some social media expert, whatever the hell that is. And so I'm obliged to undertake that training at my own expense for an indefinite period of time until they, in their wisdom, presume that I've learned whatever it is that I'm supposed to learn, which given my nature, strikes me as highly unlikely.
Jordan, what's the goal here? I mean, are they trying to...
The goal is to take my license.
Yeah. Yeah, but are they trying to send a larger message, not to you, but your followers as well?
No, they're trying to send a larger message to me, my followers, and every professional of any sort in a regulated profession in Canada. And the message is, you do exactly what the low-level, mid-wit bureaucrats tell you, or you will lose your livelihood. That's the message. And it's crystal clear.
Dr. Peterson, I mean, does everyone who needs to continue their license have to do this, or are they just cherry picking you? And why do you say it's indefinitely? You have to continue to take these courses until they decide you've learned your lesson?
Yes, that's part and parcel of the whole deal. Yes, yes. And no, I wouldn't say they're precisely cherry picking me. I suppose in a sense they are, because I'm the most well-known voice among professionals who dissent from the whatever ideology I'm supposed to be following. I dissent from that most egregiously, let's say. And so they're definitely making an example of me. And it's quite an effective example in some ways, because I have the time and resources to fight this battle, and I'm not dependent on my license for my financial stability and the support of my family. It's an extraordinarily expensive and time-consuming battle, and it's definitely the case that the goal is to take my license, because what they'll claim after dragging me through whatever this re-education is going to be, that, you know, I can't be taught, that I'm ungovernable. That'll be the final. Is a disgrace to his profession, and he's ungovernable.
Well, when it all resolves itself, we'd love to have you back.
Is this similar to what's happening here in America? They're doing this with Republicans, Donald Trump?
Well, it's similar to, I would say, cancel culture in general, and it's similar to all the attempts to stop people who have an alternative viewpoint, which wouldn't have been alternative at all like 10 years ago, from expressing themselves by any means possible for the good of humanity and the planet. So Jordan, yeah, it's part of a much broader pattern.
Yeah, so we heard about the new online college that you guys and your academy that you plan on launching. Tell us about the work you and your daughter plan on launching.
Well, I've thought for a long time that the university systems, the systems of higher education in the West in general, are corrupt beyond redemption and also extraordinarily expensive and time-consuming. And I've wanted to do something about that for many, many years. And we put together an online university project. We have about 30 professors, and they're very, very good professors. I've been privileged to meet some of the most intelligent and informed people in the world. We brought them down to Miami and filmed them producing 8-hour lectures, which are very, very well produced and accompanied by appropriate illustrations. And we'll launch that. We're going to soft launch that at the end of February to a limited number of initial subscribers. And we hope to knock the cost of a general course of higher education of various lengths. We're going to offer 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, and 4 year certificates. We hope to drop the price by 95% and to provide the participants, the students, with a high quality social opportunities as well, because we know that university is in part a social enterprise as well as an educational enterprise. We'll have the best courses there are, taught by the best professors there are. And it'll be very inexpensive, widely available, translated into multiple languages eventually. And that's the plan, to put out some competition for the increasingly idiot universities. And you can see what they're like merely by contemplating what happened in Washington, D.C., when the presidents of MIT, Harvard, and UPenn made an absolute shambles of themselves and their institutions. And if you think that that was just a consequence of them and not indication of an unbelievable deep rot, well, you're blind, because the universities are very corrupt.
Well, thank you, Jordan Peterson, for joining us from Canada, talking about the new, essentially the new college you're starting online at the end of the month. Once again, if people want more information, it's petersonacademy.com. Doctor, thank you very much for making a house call.
Hey, good to see you guys. Thanks for the invitation.
You're
welcome.
Good luck. I'm Steve Ducey.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.
And I'm Rick Walker, and you're Mike Krupa.
Hey, how you doing? Literally. That's $5. Yeah, interesting. I remember when I think Pat Buchanan referred to Canada once. I'm not sure if it was in the context of Iraq or some other issue called, Soviet Canuckistan was the term that he used. I remember it because I was in high school then, and somebody was using it as a term of derision to say, oh, those bad Americans are calling us Soviet Canuckistan. And at that time, during the Jean Chrétien years, I mean, I could say, wow, what a different country that was than it is right now. But I think it's it's a travesty. On the other hand, it sort of dovetails nicely with a lot of these videos that I'm seeing on YouTube where Canadians are saying, why I'm leaving Canada, why I'm leaving Canada. The amount of films, why I'm leaving Canada on YouTube is just growing by the day. So that's one of the reasons. I mean, woke culture is exploding. And Peterson is, I guess, the most exemplary element of that. And yeah, I hope he makes
it. Can I just get you to comment a little more on that? You're seeing a lot of videos in Poland about Canadians saying they want to leave Canada.
Yep, it's on YouTube. Anybody can see them. I think some of them are Rumble, but I've seen at least 3 that were very deep dive in their messaging in terms of the inflation, the woke culture, and so on, of literal Canadians born in Canada who are saying, don't come to Canada, and I'm leaving Canada. So
that's interesting. Have you been seeing a lot of videos about the activities of truckers and convoy activity in, say, like the last week or so as well? About
I only saw that interview with that trucker who now lives in northern New York with Tucker Carlson, one of the main organizers, who was talking about the Coots 4. But other than that, I haven't seen anything that's happening behind the scenes on that.
I see. Okay, just curious because I just kind of want to know what's going on the ground there in Poland, especially with you had that. There was a truckers' blockade or strike of some kind in Poland. Can you talk about that and bring us up to date?
Yeah, well, there was a truckers' blockade which started, I think, somewhere in the fall. What happened was the Polish truckers were protesting against the fact that Ukrainian products were coming into the EU, and Ukrainian truckers could transport these products in the EU without special permits that they would have to get before. And they were coming in without duties, basically, into the European Union. So they were transporting these products at a much basically at dumping price levels in comparison to the Polish trucking companies. So the Polish truckers said, we're going to go out of business. It's not fair that Ukrainians are not in the EU, but they're giving special EU privileges. We can't compete with that because they're always going to be cheaper. So what happened was they blocked basically all the border crossings between Poland and Ukraine. There were a couple of scuffles going on. The police tried to liquidate them, but there was just too many truckers. There were on-the-ground reports at that time where the people were filming what kind of things are going into Ukraine, for example, from the European Union. And it wasn't military equipment or humanitarian equipment, because the truckers explicitly said that we're not blocking any of the humanitarian or military equipment going into Ukraine. Although I personally thought they should have blocked the military equipment, but that's a different story. But they said we're not blocking military equipment or humanitarian equipment. We're just blocking everything else. Plus, we're very angry at the fact that they are allowed to come into the European Union. So some of the things that were on these trucks going into Ukraine, for example, like, new Mercedes S-Class, there was a sailboat going into Ukraine, motorboats. So things that, are mostly associated with people who make millions and like to have a luxurious lifestyle. Pretty interesting for a country that apparently is experiencing a war of extermination and genocide from the Russians. You would think those products would be going the other way to the West and not into Ukraine. But so there was some reporting going on about that. Now, those blockades have subsided, but because there's a huge issue right now of cheap Ukrainian grain, which continues to go into Poland. They call it experimental grain, which basically is, filled with chemicals. It shouldn't be made into bread and other products. And it shouldn't be on the Polish market. It should be dumped on the Polish market. So the farmers are protesting against that will kill their business also. And they want this Ukrainian grain out of Poland. So yesterday there were huge blockades in several Polish cities. Highways were blocked, roads were blocked, and it was a sort of it was a cautionary strike, as they said, because they were also in part protesting against the European Union's Green New Deal. And because these protests, and they were fairly big, were so widespread, even the current Deputy Minister of Agriculture was forced to come and attend this protest in solidarity, by the way, not to discuss government farmers talking about how do we resolve this, but he said, no, I'm with you guys. I'm in solidarity with you guys because what the European Union is doing is insane. Well, that's interesting in and of itself, because if you consider that the current government is very pro-EU, and I happen to know we contacted each other a few years back, the current Deputy Minister of Agriculture. It's interesting how long Donald Tusk is going to tolerate a member of his government making such inflammatory anti-EU statements, because he said the Green New Deal is going to destroy Polish agriculture. It's pretty hardcore. So we'll see what happens. But he did make those statements. He did join the farmers yesterday. And yeah, they're taking place. And the farmers are sort of combining their efforts with the huge farmers' protests in the West and Holland, especially in Germany, I'm pretty sure our listeners are aware of. There's also farmers' strikes taking part in Slovakia, in Hungary. Apparently, the Czechs are looking into joining. So this is the beginning of a farmers' movement that has had enough of the EU insane climate policy, which is killing the industry. Plus, in Poland, the issue of things being dumped on the Polish market, agricultural products, especially grain, from Ukraine with no consequences and literally at dumping price levels. So that's sort of the crux of the issue. And I think we're just starting to see the beginning of a wider movement in this regard.
Yeah, not to discredit, what anybody is saying about these protests happening in all these different countries. But what I have seen on social media, and that's why I asked you about seeing these videos about why I'm leaving Canada. Yeah. I've not seen any of that here at all. Not even a single version of that. But what I have seen is a mix of videos, some of which seem authentic, other ones that are clearly old footage of old protests being put in front of me as a viewer online to suggest to me or convince me that some of these protests are happening now, and including within the last 24 hours, a whole slew of videos making it look like right now in Canada, there is a giant convoy happening, and it's just not true.
Headed for Texas?
Yes. And so it's not happening. Like, there are efforts underway as of last night where some influencers, shall we say, have gone online to talk about some things. There was a coordinated online series of videos from a network of people, but there is no giant convoy happening in Canada at this point. Now, they might be putting one together, but they're making it look like there's one with old footage, which has had prompted people to contact me to say, what is going on? There's this thing going on in Texas, and I'm seeing, is there a giant convoy happening in Canada? And what about all these videos from Europe? Is that really happening? And I can tell you that some of it, to me, appears to be not accurate
old
at
footage.
All. And Twitter is the worst for it, because with the free speech atmosphere that's there now, it's gone beyond free speech to fabrication in a lot of cases. So
they even said that on Fox News, by the way, yesterday. I don't know if you saw it, but there was a representative from the state of Texas interviewed on Fox News saying that 700,000 trucks were headed to the border, and that a hell of a lot of them were coming all the way from Canada. Actually, I have that clip right here. And I think this guy's just lying through his teeth, because
100%.
All the video I'm seeing down here is recycled footage from the People's Convoy of spring 2022, but check this out. This is
Texas
wild.
Governor Greg Abbott refusing to give up control of the Texas border to federal officials, saying the state will not give federal agents full access to Shelby Park today. That ignores a deadline set by the Biden administration, which is today. Instead, Abbott is installing more razor wire following a Supreme Court order allowing federal agents to start removing it. Texas now receiving support from 25 Republican governors, all backing Governor Abbott's border actions, blaming the Biden administration for the crisis. Former President Trump wants to take it one step further. He's now encouraging these states to deploy their National Guard troops to Texas to prevent illegal crossings. Trump's vowing that if he becomes president again, he's going to work with Abbott to seal the border, writing, quote, Biden says let in those should not get comfortable because they will be going home. I want to bring in Texas Congressman Lieutenant Colonel Keith Self. Congressman, good morning. Governor Kristi Noem already saying, yes, I would send National Guard troops. Is that something that you think that Texas is open to? And is that a move that needs to be made now?
Well, that will be up to Governor Abbott. But I think the border has now reached the boiling point that you now see governors getting involved. We have a trucker convoy coming down to the border. The American people are going to have to get involved. I'm delighted to see 25 governors support Governor Abbott. And yeah, I think we're going to have to be aware that the president can federalize the National Guard, but it would be much harder if 25 governors sent their National Guard troops to the border to support Texas.
Karine Jean-Pierre has been asked about this, and of course she's defending her boss, President Biden, but her response is always interesting. It still seems to be a gaslighting type of response from her. The border is secure. We're working on the border. Secretary Mayorkas, we're very aware of the issues down there, but their goal is to process migrants, not to stop the flow of migrants across the border.
Cheryl, I was on the border just 3 weeks ago, and that's exactly what the Border Patrol is doing. They have 72 hours to process the illegal immigrants, turn them over to ICE or a nonprofit to move them into the interior of the United States. They are not there to stop the invasion. And that's perfectly clear to anyone that's been on the border, anyone that sees the videos. At one point during the tsunami of probably a month ago, there were no Border Patrol agents actually in the field. They were all in the office processing paperwork during that tsunami.
Let's talk about this trucker convoy. You brought this up just a moment ago. So this is called Take Our Border Back. It kicks off Monday. So you've got multiple starts. You've got trucks leaving from Virginia Beach that are going to go through Texas, Arizona, California. On the website, it describes the event as a peaceful assembly, encouraging all freedom-loving and law-abiding Americans to attend. I saw that you posted on X to raise awareness about that. You obviously just mentioned it a moment ago. I understand that you're going to be speaking once they get to Eagle Pass. I also see that it's going to go through Yuma. It's going to go San Ysidro, California as well. 700,000 vehicles. That's the prediction here. How do you keep that peaceful and on track? That's a lot of trucks.
Well, the people that have organized this are the same people that went from California to D.C. with the truckers. I understand we're going to be joined by Canadian truckers. So these people are committed to a peaceful demonstration that we've had enough. The American people have had enough. We're demanding that the Biden administration do its job, enforce the laws on the books, and secure our border. 8 million people during the Biden administration. That's more than the population of Ohio. This is the time for us to rise up as the American people and demand that our president do his job.
Well, I hope, again, I do hope that envoy is peaceful and organized and doesn't kind of, you worry about large movements like this. I mean, obviously, the Canadian trucker convoy you just mentioned ended up creating a lot of issues and supply chain issues, of course, where the Business Network, I had to ask that. But I do want to bring in Carol Ross. She's got a question for you. Go ahead, Carol.
Yeah, Congressman, I love the fact that people are standing up and using their voices peacefully. But we know that bad actors in the past have co-opted these types of events and done everything they can to make the peace-loving Americans look bad. Are you concerned that there might be some sort of co-opting of this convoy?
That's always a probability, but you learn as you do these events. So they now know that might have been in the past, so they've got measures in place to make sure that does not happen. And I am hopeful that will not happen, because this should be a peaceful movement of the American people joined by other nations if they want to come. This is the Canadian farmers, truckers. This is the German farmers. This is the French farmers. This is the Dutch farmers. This is a movement well beyond the United States that people are simply tired of the overreach of their federal governments, and we're pushing back. Now is the time.
We continue, obviously, these proceedings against Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas. Where are we with that right now? Before we go, where are you with that?
Well, wants to impeach the secretary, and it failed because of Republican votes. I think that we will try again in the very near future. I thought we were going to do it last week, but I think we're close to doing it. And this time, I fully expect that impeachment to pass and him to be impeached, pass it to the Senate for an actual trial.
Okay. All right. We are, of course, following that story as well. Congressman Keith Self. Congressman, thank you for being here.
Now, I got to tell you, I've made the drive many, many times from South Texas to Canada. Takes 29 hours and 46 minutes to be exact. And that's not even counting the time that it takes to cross the border. I mean, that can be a 10-hour ordeal just getting across the damn border. So if the Canadian truckers, they'd have to leave like now to get there by Monday. How's that going to work? Is he just bullshitting? What do you think, guys?
Well, I saw I put the Twitter that he wrote in the chat where he actually puts the post on the website. I don't know about the Canadian truckers. I think the American ones will. I think it's a good idea, but I know for sure the Polish farmers aren't going to get there by Monday. So
yeah. Yeah. I don't know about this one. What do you think, Rick? You're the trucker convoy expert up there in Canada. You tell us.
Well, you know, it's an information war. And a lot of people thought I was crazy for covering some other trucker-related things up here within the last year. I can only say that I've seen this movie a couple of times now.
Yep, we sure
and
have.
you know, they shut down the entire area of downtown Toronto a couple of times because there was a lot of social media posting going on showing a convoy heading for Ontario, and then nothing.
They shut down the whole city center
Queens
twice.
Park, you know, twice, yeah.
Twice.
And then
nothing happened.
A couple of people showed up with some Canadian flags and a couple of F. Trudeau flags, and they were laughing at the cops.
Right.
Saying, ha, 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 you did all this for what? For us? You know, like, I mean, okay, man, that's politics. But I'm not here because I'm bought and paid for by anybody. I'm practicing journalism, and I'm about truth. Okay. Yeah. And so I'm not going to sit here and lie about crap. And I was not part of the big online network of postings last night because I'm not in the bag for anybody. All right.
That's right.
So nobody called me to say, hey, we're doing a thing and you get to participate. No, it wasn't like that for me. But I am tied in and I have people who know what's going on.
Yeah, you've got sources.
Oh, yeah.
Nobody's telling you anything about a convoy headed to Texas, right?
I will tell you that there are some people in trucks driving around, but it ain't like that. And it sure as hell ain't 700,000. And I've seen this before, so I'll believe that when I see it.
Me too. Me too. I mean, I think it would be brilliant, don't you?
Mike, I mean, this also is why I asked that question, because I'm having people asking me, well, what about all this going on in this country and that country? And do you know, what are your sources in Germany or these other places? Because I don't know anymore if what I'm seeing online is real.
Well, and I tell you, my sources in the Texas Patriot movement tell me that they're not planning to join the convoy.
Yeah.
They're not going. They don't have anything organized.
And I've seen, you know, on Alex Jones on InfoWars, the main organizer for this convoy. And yeah, okay, but I'm not getting information to suggest that this is getting a lot of traction or momentum. And if it's being organized by the same people who put that People's Convoy together before, like that was a clown show.
That was a shit show. It was.
They couldn't get into the Capitol and the cops blocked them. So they drove around in circles for a few days. They had problems at their camp. And then they just drove back and forth across the country a couple of times. Then they had fighting and all kinds of controversy and accusations of money being stolen, and they all ended up fighting. And it's the same crap that
they were led by a guy named Santa.
Yeah, I mean, and then there's this whole thing that's been going on in Ottawa, and we saw that turn into a disaster. And you know, they're all sitting there talking about, you know, feel the vibes, and you know, it's like, oh, for crying! And it discredits everything that came from what happened in Ottawa with the original convoy, and the gains that were made there is people pushed back, like real people pushed back and achieved real things. So I'm concerned when I see stuff like this. I know what's going on at the border is serious, and there seems to be something real happening there. But this whole, we're coming from Canada and all the Canadian truckers are on board, I don't believe it.
I'll believe it when I see it. We'll see what happens on Monday, because all this is supposed to start converging on Monday, and then February 3rd, they're all going to show up in Eagle Pass, supposedly. But I think it'll probably be really shy of 700,000. I'll believe that when I see it. But we're almost out of time here. So let's wrap it up. Mike, tell people where they can find you and where they can get your new book.
Well, you can find me on X at MG Krupa. Now, my previous media project, which is VotumTV, we sort of archived that for now because I'm going to be moving into a new media space, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, maximum months.
Everybody was asking about that. They said Mike hasn't done a show in several months. And I said, well, he's busy working on a book and trying to get his PhD, but
one of the reasons. But I will be back. Don't worry, I'll be back. In the media sphere, and I think we've got some exciting things lined up. So at MG Krupa, and if you want to get the book and you're Polish, let me just send you the link, which we can put here in our private chat, and then you guys can link it up in the general recording, the description at the bottom. So anybody who's Polish, they can get the book, which we described just a few moments ago.
Thanks. We'll do that.
I am putting the link up now.
Or if you read the Polish language, unfortunately, it's not available in English yet.
If there are enough voices demanding it, we can consider an English translation. Okay, so the link is right there.
Very cool.
At X at MG Krupa, the book is coming out on February 20th. I will be Dr. Mike, hopefully beginning February 5th, and you could visit your local shrink and talk politics with me. And apart from that, well, we'll see what happens in Eagle Pass. We'll see what happens in Poland. I think this year is going to be turbulent for all three of our countries and my old country. So we'll be watching that. I hope to be back with you guys soon. And if we move the media project forward in Poland, I will obviously be looking to have the two of you also on my show. So we'll be working on that and keeping in contact regarding the new project.
That sounds great. Love to do that.
Mike. Yeah.
And let me just say, if it's between me and a box of 12 Timbits and a triple at Tim Hortons in Toronto, I'm staying in Toronto. Forget about it, you know.
Forget about it. Mike, as always, it's such a pleasure to have you. Thanks for joining us on Strange Bedfellows. We will see you soon. And thank you for tuning in out there. We'll see you next Saturday night right here at 9 o'clock. Peace.
Thank you.
In a universe full of ideas, we draw lightness from the dark to a place where opposites attract. Right meets left, positive touches negative, sparking an explosion of truth. Because politics makes strange bedfellows.
This has been a Maverick Multimedia production.